This podcast is brought to you by Ingrok. If data is the lifeblood of a modern IT organization, Ingrok is the circulatory system moving that data from where it is to where it needs to be with a seamless, easy-to-use SaaS offering. Maybe you're trying to standardize the application delivery policies for your organization across multiple data centers or cloud environments. Or you're building a SaaS offering that needs to deploy and manage software inside customers' networks that you don't control. Or you need to be able to connect to IoT devices regardless of which network those devices live on. Ingrok allows you to access that data in a way that is both developer and CISO friendly. For more information, contact Ingrok today. And now, on to our show.
Can I get the icon in cornflower blue?
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 33 of Can I Get That Software in Blue? I'm one of your hosts, Chad Tyndall. Along with me, he flew into New York City on a plane for some steak. No delay, finally here to record in person, share and play. The artisan of AI in every single way, Steve Mazak, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice that our first ever recording in person together.
Very cool. This is very professional.
It's a great setup. It sounds great. It looks great.
Yeah, it's fun.
Now, I've been trying to get you to come out to New York City to have steak at Quality Meats for 7 years now, and we finally got to do it last night. How was it?
Like every bite was delicious.
Everything we had.
Not a single bad thing. Like all the flavors worked. The wine pairings were, I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, the dessert's incredible there. They make their own ice cream in-house. I've never been to a steakhouse that makes their own ice cream too. So.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I have either.
It's like hitting on every level. It's incredible.
They're using the whole cow.
Absolutely. Oh my God. I never even thought about it that way. Nose to tail, baby.
Nose to tail. Tip to tip.
Oh, tip to tip.
We should probably edit that.
Might have to cut that out.
Tip to tail, I meant.
Tip to tail. Okay. Well, welcome to the city.
Thank you.
Our guest today is the head of marketing at Oso, which was founded by another MongoDB alum, Graham Naray. Previously, she was the senior director of developer experience at Sneak and the director of growth marketing at MongoDB before that. She's also a very active angel and seed investor and advisor to several startups, which we'll be talking about later on in the show. Our researchers were doing some deep background and found that Jackson Hole is her idea of paradise, with marketing and growth insights that are sure to entice. Welcome to the show, Francesca Krihely-Price.
Thank you for having me.
That's awesome. Awesome to see you. We used to work together many years ago.
Yeah, great times.
Ago.
Yeah, I got you to go to many meetups and many conferences.
Absolutely. It was fun. We traveled a lot in those days.
I know.
Before COVID.
Crazy.
We don't really do it that much anymore. Maybe it's coming back.
We were truly like, if you can get on a plane to go somewhere and someone will let you talk about MongoDB, we will put you on that plane. Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah, that was fun. A lot of airline miles. Well, you're working at a new company called Oso, so why don't we start with that? Tell us about Oso, what Oso does, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so Oso is Spanish for bear, but we like to joke that it's also for authorization.
Spanish for authorization.
We build an authorization library called Polar and provide a service for that. So we are an authorization as a service company. Authorization is one of those pieces of plumbing in software that becomes more complex over time. And I think a lot of customers are trying to build better collaboration features for their customers, better tooling to interact with their customers. And for that, you need more fine-grained authorization. And as you build out microservices and more in serverless architectures and your architecture gets more complex, those authorization services become more difficult to manage. And so Oso, we're providing that service to make that transition easier and to help you manage your authorization long-term, make your authorization policies more readable, and also help the architecture and enforcement simplify over time.
Good. Might have you move a little closer to the table if you can't. Yeah. So, okay. What was that? You kind of answered my next question, so let me skip ahead here.
Well, maybe ask it again, and maybe I'll say it better.
Well, no. I was going to ask you what does it really mean, authorization as a service? Like, what is that for people who might not know?
Well, yeah, because when I typically think of authorizations, it can reach into your apps and.
Exactly, and that's one of the problems is that because the data needs to be so coupled in your app, sometimes the data ends up being everywhere. It's hard to figure out where it is. And then for enforcement and auditing purposes, it becomes really challenging for security protocols to ensure that they're being followed and things like that. So a lot of teams get frustrated with that over time and realize that they can do something better. I think on top of that, the challenge is that the talent pool wants to work on building product for customers. And even though there's a huge rise in like platform engineering and infrastructure engineering, it becomes like a Groundhog Day scenario of like, oh, I have to build this authorization service
You have
again.
to have it.
You have to have it. And there's a lot of emerging technologies like generative AI, for example, where that needs to be in place, because you can't risk somebody's, for example, one of our customers has a platform for voice AI. And if their platform authorization isn't perfect, then some other user can access somebody else's voice AI, which is then, their IP is compromised, and voice AI is especially, could be used for especially malicious purposes. So
We've done it here on the pod.
yeah.
Well, I mean,
I faked Steve's voice.
my bank still uses my voice as part of their authentication.
Can you say my voice is my password?
Delete that out of this episode. But every time I call in, they make me say that stuff, and it's like,
Yeah.
when are you guys going to catch on that this is no longer
Pretty
an elevator?
dangerous. Yeah. Yeah. So why would you need a service for that? It's to decouple it from your application, have it centralized, the auditing, logging all in one place. Make sure that, rather than a whole team of engineers building the whole service, there's, your whole development team understands how to build authorization policies, but it's all managed in a service.
So is it like an SDK that I install in my app, and then I use that SDK where I need to have authorization?
There is an open source library that you can just use to write your policies, and that's one piece. And then there's a cloud service that you connect to your application, and you write the policies, and then it calls to the service to understand, where to capture the data from.
And what do you write the policies in? Is it like a language, or is it?
Yeah, so the language is called Polar. So
Okay.
Polar Bear
I'm getting
Oso.
I'm getting the bear theme.
Yeah,
I'm
we
waiting
like
for you to
we like
announce
bears.
brown and black and all these other ones.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about how we use bears, because it hasn't really, like, when I joined Oso, I told the whole team, I was like, oh, I'm the newest bear. And they're like, we don't call ourselves bears. And I was like, why not?
What is it? Osoians or something?
Yeah, they don't call themselves
They don't have a
anything because they
descriptor?
haven't had a corny marketer on the team yet.
Yeah,
So
That's fair.
it takes something really corny. But all joking aside, yeah, I've been trying to figure out, okay, so types of bears are going to be products potentially, and then maybe there's some other use of bears that we use in different parts.
Do you have a bear mascot?
We do.
Like a cute little.
We do have a cute little bear mascot that is drawn actually by one of our first non-technical hires. Her name is Steffi, and she's incredibly talented. And I didn't know that she drew all the illustrations until a couple weeks ago, and I'm so impressed. But yeah, she draws all the illustrations. Apparently, he or she
What's the
doesn't have a
mascot's
gender.
name?
Yeah, no gender, no name, no backstory
No
yet.
name. Oh.
So there's stuff to be worked on. This person, this bear is craving an identity.
Interesting.
But we have a couple little illustrations of him as like baby got our back.
Oh, okay. That's funny.
So it makes a lot.
Baby got
So
our back.
yeah,
That one took me a second. I
Yeah,
was
they've-
Our back, yeah,
they-
RBAC. Right?
they've taken on a personality.
I love that. Baby got our back.
Baby
That's
got our
great.
back.
Well, so I would say authorization is obviously like the next step after authentication, and authentication is a huge market. Okta has a huge valuation.
Yeah.
And my chief revenue officer, my boss at Ingrok, was former Okta. Right?
Oh yeah.
And former Mongo as well.
Yeah. No Ben forever.
Yeah, absolutely. So is this kind of going to be the next extension? Would an authentication company like Okta potentially be a natural acquirer of a company like Oso? How big do you think the market is for this
Our
authorization service?
estimation right now is that authorization's a $25 billion market, but we see it as similar to, authentication is a great kind of corollary. We also see things like Segment and Twilio, just different ways of abstracting, and LaunchDarkly is another great example of feature flags, different ways of abstracting complexities in software that like people have to build over and over again and impinge on the complexity of your architecture. So that's sort of how we see it. We see those all as one master category, and authorization is just the new one that's come about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's certainly an undifferentiated heavy lifting that every app has to have.
100%.
And
Yeah.
you don't want to have to build yourself if you don't want to, because developers want to work on something else, like you said.
AWS term, undifferentiated heavy lifting.
Well, I'll never forget it. I mean, 4.5 years, I said it every day.
Yeah, I
basically.
bet.
It's drilled into my brain. I can't not think in those terms.
I bet.
You run marketing at Oso, and part of that responsibility is developer relations team, right? Can you tell people who might not know what a DevRel team does? Like what those people do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hiring for the DevRel team right now. If you like the idea of this job that I'm about to tell you about, DevRel, the cool thing about DevRel is I think a lot of people have one view of it, which is these are developers who go to conferences and talk about your software. And that is one task and one type of DevRel. And I know a lot of people who love that part of the job, but there's so many different other parts of the job. And at an early stage company, what I usually advise the startups that I work with is like index on one thing when you hire your first couple DevRel people and say, okay, we know that we need to get this thing right, whether it's going to conferences, writing great technical content, building out educational libraries, making better docs, like some developer relations teams for less technical and less infrastructure heavy products. Sometimes you could have a DevRel team member who can get proficient enough to write all the docs. There's a lot of different flavors it can take. And as teams become more complex, there becomes like a kind of federation of that within a DevRel team. For early stage startups, though, it is typically just like advertising and promotion and anything you could do to get the word out. So for our team, for example, we're hiring 2 people to start, but I know I want one person who's just loves going to conferences, is well known in the community, probably organizes some things on their own, and just loves talking about software. Typically, that is great because when you want to go out in the community and talk about your software, and this is really different from the MongoDB days than I'll talk about after. But with MongoDB, everybody wanted to, at the time that I joined, there was just this huge surge of interest. It was after the bear video, the web scale bear video, and everyone was like, what is MongoDB?
MongoDB is web scale.
Yeah, and everyone, that was a joke that somebody made about MongoDB, and they were trying to say that MongoDB wasn't legitimate, but it actually was a huge growth lever for us and that everyone knew the name. And so as a result, every conference organizer, every meetup organizer wanted to have something related to MongoDB at their event because they knew there was just this thirst for curiosity. With most DevRel teams, you just don't have that because if you're not open source, you're considered a shill if you're just going to talk about your software. So you have to have people come on your team who have interesting perspectives and have expertise in other software. And that I think is a huge lever for you to gain, build your reputation and help people learn about the company without just going to your talk and realizing, oh, this is just a sales pitch, because that's not what developers want at all. Yeah. They want to believe. They're very, skeptical about software because they've been burned a few times. Also, if you think about it, why would a developer just take a piece of software that they saw at a conference and try using it in production immediately? There's a ton of reputational risk on your shoulders if you just suggest something. So that's by nature why they're often skeptical. And I have to explain this to marketers all the time. I have to explain, this is what their job is. They have a ton of pressure on them. And also, if they get it wrong, it usually means on the low end, it's like, oh, I have to stay up all night. And on the high end, it's like you could potentially risk customer trust in the long term, which nobody wants that. That's one type of DevRel that we're looking to hire. And then another type is somebody who is a great writer, great communicator, and also loves working with community members. And so somebody who maybe doesn't want to go out and go to conferences and talk to people all day. That's definitely more of my style. I don't like going to conferences and talking to people for hours. It's really tiring.
So for that, would you be looking for people who have a larger social media following and interact with developers on Twitter more?
Not necessarily. I think a lot of the times that's what people are looking for. And one of my former colleagues, Wesley, who works at AWS now, I think they still work at AWS. They had this awesome thread that was all about you don't need to have a huge following to be great at DevRel, and people who hire for DevRel always over-index on the following that you have on Twitter, and that's just not always the best way to go. And I think that's so legit because it can demoralize so many people who think this role is exciting for them. Yeah. And you don't necessarily need a big following to be good at DevRel.
It can't hurt though.
It can hurt.
It's not a bad thing.
I would say if you have that's the other thing. It's you can pay for the followers, and then obviously if you paid for 40,000 followers 6 years ago, now you're probably way beyond that and have been able to use that leg up to gain more followers.
How much does it cost to buy 40,000 followers?
About 4 or 5 years ago, it was maybe more than 4 or 5 years ago. But I know that on Instagram, maybe 6 years ago, you could buy 40,000 followers for pretty cheap, less than $1,000.
Oh wow!
Yeah, But Instagram was a different platform then. Like influencer marketing wasn't a thing. It wasn't, nobody thought you could monetize that.
Well, how wrong were they? Wow.
Yeah. but I think in terms of hiring the right person for a DevRel team, I think first of all, someone who's in DevRel is going to be seen and heard a lot more than most other people on your team at an early stage company. And even now, like the DevRel teams at AWS are talking to community members way more than, any of the engineering leaders at that company.
Absolutely.
That's just one example, but almost every other DevRel org, you would say the same thing. So, or a DevRel org that is community oriented. And so I think it's really about hiring people who share the same values and love working with your engineering team, and then also will be able to bring people into the fold and are not exclusionary and things like that. I think those are the things that I think are the hardest to screen for. And then naturally, there's another challenge, which is how technical and proficient do you need the people to be? For some companies, you need somebody who is just capable of building apps pretty quickly, and those apps don't need to scale or anything like that. But for other companies, like for example, in the case of MongoDB, when we were hiring developer advocates, we needed people who had ran production applications before, because they were part of the role in the early days was like advising people on how to use MongoDB.
Yeah, it's education and
So
support.
it's a lot of education. And so you can't trust that somebody who has never done that before can do a good job in that role. And, you want to set people up for success. So I think there's a lot of factors to consider when hiring DevRel folks. And if you ever have this question, please reach out to me, because I can definitely talk to you about it and guide you through that.
Yeah, well, so Steve and I come from the pre-sales background. There's a lot of crossover in those roles, right? Building code samples, building demos, talking at conferences, talking on webinars and that type of thing. Now, DevRel people wouldn't be involved in sales opportunities as much, but how do you view the difference in terms of, like, an SA's KPIs would probably be revenue-based for the most part, or generating new logos and working on deals and stuff. What kind of KPIs would you use for a DevRel team?
I get this question all the time, and I wrote a blog post about it because I just got it.
I'm teeing it up.
Yeah. There's so many, and I think it really comes down to, I think sometimes at companies, the CEO will have a very myopic view of DevRel, and they have a very short-sighted view of the role of DevRel and community in an organization. You're not going to see results like immediately. It is not like adding a salesperson to a territory, which usually you'll see a result pretty quickly, and that salesperson will get to work, and you add an SA, and those two folks will get to work building pipeline, finding opportunities. With DevRel, I think it takes a little bit longer to get the machine going and to start seeing the impact, the big impacts of having those people in place. I think a lot of people look down on measuring signups. The head of marketing at Pinecone, which is like a vector database, he wrote a blog post that was like sign up schminups or something. It has a very clever title, but essentially saying that that's not the end goal. You shouldn't be measuring that. And I totally hear that. At the same time, one of the earliest indicators that you get from doing good DevRel is visits to your homepage, search volume, blog visits, GitHub stars, and signups. So those are things that are important to measure. I think it's hard sometimes for DevRel teams to get behind getting measured. I think sometimes
It feels too corporate.
I think that is one element, and also if you get DevRel folks who were former practitioners in whatever field you work in, they're just not used to that. So it's difficult to get their head around. And I think one of the things I suggested to a company recently, because they were having a challenging time with their DevRel team, that they weren't meeting objectives. Also, I think they had hired a bunch of people who didn't have the skill set, so they had to go through a process of letting go of a few people who just were not up to the task. And then they also had some challenges with wanting to comply with certain KPIs. And so what I said to them is, okay, if you're having a challenge there, you got to sit the team down and say, okay, what are we here to do? Like, let's start from the beginning and say, let's build the foundation of the team. What's the mission? What do we want to accomplish? Things like that. And then I think that conversation builds trust with the team. There's some transparency. Let's have this conversation. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about at OSO is I know that we have specific goals, and I want to figure out a way for the DevRel team to align to those. But when the team comes on board, I'm going to say to them, these are the goals for now. You're not going to get fired if you don't hit these goals, But if you don't hit these goals, it tells us that something is wrong and we're going to have a conversation about it. And it doesn't mean that you did something wrong. It means that maybe we need to change our approach. And then maybe that conversation down the line has to happen where, okay, clearly the metrics we're measuring are not either helping us see if we're doing a good job and you don't like it. Let's have a conversation about it. At Amazon, one of the things that they did, I don't know if they still do this, but they measured impressions. And I remember that the head of DevRel once at a conference showed like this equation for how he measured impressions. And I think it was a joke, but
I wouldn't be so sure.
I'm pretty sure it was a joke. But basically it's, how many people do you talk to at events? How many people do you interact with in different spaces? And I think that gives you a good sense of the breadth of opportunities you're opening yourself up to. Yeah. I don't think it helps you understand the quality of those interactions and things like that, but I don't think anything is perfect. And I think there's a lot of ways to think about it. The one thing I always tell people is please don't measure blog post visits because that's just so, I don't like that at all.
It's trying to like predict what's going to go viral and like.
And it encourages you to do things that are short term rather than long term. Like the best blog content is stuff that people find years later and still find valuable, even though getting on Hacker News for something exciting is really valuable as well. So,
how do you think about the changing dynamic of how we engage with content now? Like, 10 years ago, I wasn't using YouTube to learn as much as I am now. Like I use it almost every day to learn something.
Who's your favorite YouTubers?
I like Matt Wolf. He's doing the AI news every week.
Cool.
I watch the All In podcast on YouTube usually, and I'm trying to learn about small business ownership right now. So I'm watching a bunch of small business people talk about how to think about doing due diligence and stuff like that. It's really interesting. But it got me thinking about DevRel because I was looking at Pinecone and, trying to learn about vector databases and LangChain. So I just started Googling LangChain and all the examples came up with Pinecone. It's like, it's very smart on Pinecone to attach themselves LangChain.
Yeah, they're doing a really good job. Yeah. I invested in Chroma, which is another vector database that you should definitely try. It's open source. and yeah, but Pinecone's done a good job attaching themselves to LangChain.
So do you think like DevRel's role is kind of changing a little bit as far as the channels they use to get in touch with people? Like, are people using TikTok more and other things? Is that an effective platform for DevRel?
Interesting. I think everyone learns in different ways. Yeah. I've actually been talking to a lot of developers to try to understand their learning patterns. And a lot of them say, I really don't like using YouTube, but some people do. Yeah. So I think the challenge for a lot of smaller teams is figuring out when to start making those investments because you have to provide different types of content sources. Yeah. One of the things I like to do that I'm trying to do at OSO is doing content recycling, which means if you have a big piece of content that works, trying to turn that into a smaller video or like a TikTok or something like that. And that helps produce a lot of valuable content without having to come up with new ideas all the time and also appealing to different learning styles. So I think that's a cool model.
We're going to reach a different audience in each one.
Exactly.
Like I was talking to someone who was in their early 20s about podcasts and they said, oh yeah, I listen to podcasts on Instagram. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, not the whole episode. They just cut it down into 2-minute clips and 3 minutes. This person cannot watch an hour-long podcast on YouTube. They would never watch.
That's part of the thing, yeah.
Right? But the younger generation, they want to see it in these 1 minute to 2 minute YouTube shorts, TikTok shorts, or whatever TikTok calls it. I don't even know.
It's just
clips on Twitter or whatever. I think you're right that content recycling idea is super important because it's going to go into new channels that people would never have seen.
I do want to try TikTok. Viam, which is the robotics company that our former CTO, Elliot Horowitz, and founder of MongoDB, he started this robotics company, and they have a TikTok where, and their TikTok is awesome. I don't know why it hasn't taken off as much as it should have, but they just post TikToks of their robots that they build in their office doing the things that they want them to. And so one of them was a TikTok walking by with like a bottle of champagne. Another one was like
the robot was carrying the champagne.
Yeah, another one was like at a cocktail party. I think it was like going around, passing around booze. There are non-booze related ones, but those were the ones that I remember. But they're so funny and they're so cool.
Well, I think that's the thing. You have to make it funny and engaging. You can't just do like a 2-minute clip of us talking. It's not the same.
I do wonder in maybe 2 or 3 years if it's because like I think I think Twitter started out as like silly and goofy, and Instagram as well, and maybe there is a kind of shift in the content that becomes more educational and serious. I don't know. The trend I'm seeing that tells me that that's a possibility is all of the food TikTok. There's like tons of food recipes on TikTok, and I don't use TikTok a lot because I'm an adult.
That's actually a meme on Instagram, I think.
Yeah.
I don't use TikTok because I'm an adult, so I see TikToks 3 months later on Instagram.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But what I see is in the newsletters I get, it's like, oh, here's this viral recipe from TikTok, and it's like it's not a very complicated recipe, or it's like, something
it's meat
so
on a tortilla
silly.
fried on a.
Wait, you've seen that too?
Yeah. Which I want to try.
That actually does sound really good.
It does sound good.
And then the other one was like watermelon dipped in mustard, which is apparently really good. I was like,
that's sweet.
French's or like Dijon? You got to get
French's.
What? Yellow French's?
Mustard, and I was like, I'm sure that's an accident that's happened at a barbecue and somebody had a delightful bite, and that was it.
This is like Willy Wonka flavors.
Yeah, so weird. So that tells me that people are learning things on TikTok and taking them into their real life. Yeah. But in the context of software development, what is so bite-sized and simple that you could do that, like a recipe that's because the TikTok recipes, the thing about them is that they're easy and simple and they're not complicated. So what is a thing that you could do on TikTok in that small attention span to get people's?
So I've been thinking about this a lot, and one of the things I think is interesting you just hit on is like, and Chad, you said this too, is they need to be funny. And years ago at Elastic, we had hired a former comedian turned SDR turned enablement person named RC. So shout out to RC. But she was an improv comedian and she also does stand up. But she developed a video for SDR enablement that I probably watched 3 times because it was hilarious. I still remember it. That moment was like, okay, people learn better when they're having fun. And so enablement should be fun. But I'm surrounded by a bunch of serious people that don't want to have fun. Well, I don't care anymore. I'm going to make this enablement fun. And that worked. People started remembering more and commenting that it was one of the best enablements they had ever had because we did more improv style with humor injected.
So DevRel people need to go to comedy workshops.
They don't need to, but I think there's something interesting about learning how to inject humor into these videos because they keep you engaged. It's not just a shtick.
Totally. One of the best books that I listened to on Audible during the horrible year that was 2020 was this book called Humor Seriously. And it's by two Stanford professors, but the premise of the book is exactly that you can use humor. And even if you're not funny, the whole premise of the book is even if you're not funny, you can learn how to use humor to help you in the workplace. And that humor is not something that is only part of your personal life. One of the things that I took from the book that I love and I've gotten great feedback on is they had this section about using humor in email. And there was one thing that was about vacation responders. I said, why? I said, I have a fun personality. Why should I have a funny joke in my vacation responder? Like, nobody needs to say, thanks for your note, blah, blah, blah. And I get so many responses now to my vacation responder. People saying, wow, that's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Do you have the same one every time or you use it?
No, I change it. I change it once in a while. So, and they're not always funny, but sometimes they are just, it's not standard. And it's like, I went to Iceland for a while, in May. And I think the out of office was something like, yeah, I'm going to be back, whatever. And then if I don't slip off a glacier or something, like I'll email you when I get back. Yeah. And then I had a video link in the PS that was like, guess where I am? And I think it was a video of Iceland. People like that because I wasn't like, hi, I'm hiking in Iceland, and I wasn't bragging about it, but people responded back after. It was like, oh, how was Iceland? And I said, how did you know I was there? And they're like, oh, I clicked on the video in your vacation responder. So I don't necessarily think that it's not something that I want to say I'm bragging about, but it allows you to build a relationship with someone in a different way that allows you to see like, hey, I have a personality. I want to bring some joy into your world, and we'll laugh about it.
I know, I'm a real human being.
Real human being.
It's that bringing your whole self to work thing.
Yeah. But that book is great for that. And I think it's such a good shout to suggest that for not just for people in DevRel, but anyone in a role that's like customer facing, how to inject some play and fun. And I think improv classes are underrated. There's so many good improv classes for business because all of life is improv. Like we're all just LARPing in reality.
I mean, we are like, I couldn't agree more. I think improv training is one of the most important things for sales, and it's rarely done.
Why don't we bring that in? We should.
Well, I've been talking to
sales leaders should bring that in. Like that's a great idea. Okay, so Oso did a $3 million seed round in 2019, an $8 million A round in 2021, and then very recently a $15 million B round, right, in June 2023. Now, the VC market's changed a lot in the last few years, so I'm just curious what kinds of metrics the VCs are looking for now when they go to do a B round in terms of adoption, growth, and then also, as you, I'm sure, are planning for a potential C round, what are they sort of looking for in that round now that might have been different from how it was 2 years ago?
Yeah. So we didn't raise a B, we raised an A1, which is like an extension of the A. Okay. We brought on a new investor. So that was the purpose of that.
Crunchbase showed it as a B. That's
I know. It's confusing. It was confusing for me too to understand. I was like, oh, this isn't a B.
Okay, so this is an A1.
An A1, yeah. So yeah, the venture market's changed. We can be creative.
Okay, great. It's more of a bridge round to a B?
I think it is. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And I think investors, I do think that the growth at all costs thing is sort of pervasive now. And I'm not sure if there will be a shift back into that anytime soon. Obviously, I think it would be cool if there was, just because it allows companies a bit more time and a bit more comfort in being able to try a lot of things. But I also think that some companies spent an enormous amount of money that they didn't need to and scaled pretty inefficiently with the birth that they were given with growth at all costs, and being able to raise crazy rounds and at valuations that maybe they won't be able to match. So I think that the more somber environment now is actually better for companies in the long term. The kinds of things that our investors are looking at, I mean, they're the same that they've always looked at, which is, top of funnel growth, customer growth. Churn is not really, I think, something that at our stage we're talking about a lot, especially since the paid product that we launched was only launched in 2022. So it's pretty early. But
so would you say that, let's say for raising a B round, that the expectations are the same as they were 3 or 4 years ago, but it's just going to take longer to get there because growth is a little slower now? Or have they lowered the numbers that...
I don't actually know the answers to that. I do think that somebody who is a venture capitalist would probably give a better answer to that because they're actively engaging in deals, looking at term sheets, giving out term sheets and stuff. Right. So I do think somebody like that would probably be better to speak to that. One of the things I do know is that our investors are really they're asking us questions about deal cycles, like why are things happening certain ways, like how are people adopting the product. So although we are sending them top line metrics, when we have the conversations with them, they want to understand the dynamics, and especially with a product that is a product like Oso, which is, even though it's a newer, it's like a newer market, it's a similar product type that people are used to buying.
But it's still a new category.
But it's a new category. So they're really curious, how are people understanding this new category? How does that fit into their priorities list? Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that they're really curious about and are fascinating in growing a new business. Because, for example, for me, like I worked at 2 companies before this. One of them, databases, pretty old software. Everyone uses one. And then the other one was like vulnerability management software, which now is required and everyone uses it, whether they use Dependabot or they use something like a Sneak. So I think for me, what's interesting is exploring that new category and understanding, how do we get people to prioritize and buy this new product.
Is it a category? Is it like, has Gartner recognized it as a new category yet? Are you sort of working with them on
that? No, I've gotten a bunch of emails from Gartner and I've had a hard time understanding what they want.
They want $40,000.
Yeah, minimum
for a new category.
They have a number of different people that reach out to you, and the ones that have been reaching out to me are not necessarily the ones that are covering like the IAM. But I think in the Gartner speak, we'd probably be in the IAM category. And there might be a subset of that category soon. But yeah, I mean, it's tough when you're so early stage. You're like, what are the investments I need to make? Is Gartner the right thing? Do I want to build those relationships? Do we have time to build those relationships? And at a technical company, you really need the co-founders to do that work. So it's always challenging to figure out when the right time to start doing those things are. But at the same time, like, paying Gartner and Forrester is something that a lot of companies have balked at recently. And there is a trend to, especially in this like developer-led environment, to just rely on like word of mouth and the bottoms-up growth. I wonder if there's going to be a massive shift back to saying, we need this brand approval from Gartner and Forrester.
That's a good question. I don't know, because I've seen the same thing. It's like when I was at Elastic early days, we hired a head of marketing that wanted to go do the whole PR thing. And we decided not to eventually because it was too early, because our target customer didn't care about Gartner and Forrester. It was developers that were adopting our software. Years later, I went to a meeting in Norway or Sweden or something, and one of the leaders at the bank asked me about Gartner. I was like, oh, you're the first person that's ever asked me about this at Elastic. And he was surprised. And then I said, how do you make decisions based on the Gartner stuff? And he said, I just don't have time to go look at everything else. And my developers aren't bringing me new tech often enough. So the only way for me to stay abreast of what's happening is Gartner reports.
It's like a shortcut.
It's a shortcut for them.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so that's
They definitely still
totally
use
valid.
it.
Yeah,
Right,
they still use it.
absolutely.
Because for an executive that's very busy, it's a very good way to get a very quick snapshot of what's happening and like what technologies are leading. And if you're not a bleeding edge adopter, then you need that stuff to know what's successful and how.
And just who the top 5 players are.
And then next thing you know, it's like, okay, let's do a RFP for these top 3 vendors for this solution.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of one earlier stage company that I think has done a really great job at courting Gartner and helping Gartner see them as a resource for understanding the space is ChainGuard.
I haven't heard of them.
Oh my gosh.
ChainGuard.
They're
Is this a bike
awesome.
accessory?
No, no. They're in the supply chain security space. They're best known for this. It's supply chain security. So looking at all of the tools you have in your development pipeline and understanding like what your vulnerability risk is based on all the tools in the supply chain, like all the software you use, all the open source software you use, and things like that. And the thing that people know them for is this, I think it's like a container called Wolfie that they use, that they basically will keep that up to date with open source vulnerabilities and like fix the vulnerabilities. And that obviates the need for anyone else who's using Wolfie to have to do that. So, but there's a few other products in there, but they've done a really good job of helping educate Gartner on the state of cloud native application security and also cloud native supply chain security, and have been able to get a lot of, build that relationship in a different way. And also it's helped them get a leg up in certain ways.
I want to talk about your time before OSO and maybe some lessons learned. So you have a large focus in your career on growth marketing, product-led growth for companies that focus on developers. And you started down that path in a big way at MongoDB, which obviously was very successful. I checked today, it's $25 billion valuation.
Woo!
You went to Sneak. They just recently did a $200 million Series G at a $7.5 billion valuation. So you're great at picking successful companies, no question about it.
Knock on wood.
Can you just tell people very briefly what Sneak is?
I think now they're mostly an application security platform, but they specialize in helping you find and fix vulnerabilities in your applications.
So it's like a source code scanner.
Exactly. And I think the main difference with Sneak was they integrated it directly into the developer workflow. So it's integrated in your CI/CD, it's integrated in your IDEs. That like main mindset shift differentiated them from all the other vulnerability management tools, which were cumbersome. Security teams had a really hard time rolling them out because developers didn't want to use them. And so,
right. And the security team that ran the scan wasn't part of the developer team. It was like later in the life cycle.
Yeah.
So with Sneak, you catch it earlier.
Yeah, the idea is you catch it when you're developing it and you move it out of there. So it's both for open source vulnerabilities and also for code vulnerabilities. So like for your proprietary code, like a classic SaaS tool. They made some headway into like cloud security, and I think they've like moved back a little bit from that. And now they're focusing a lot on like AI and security to help you write more secure code, which is similar to in some ways to what GitHub Copilot's doing and stuff like that. So,
are there things that you tried at MongoDB and Synk from a growth perspective, marketing and whatnot, that didn't work and that you decided like, I'm not going to do that again. Like, I don't want to take that forward to my next place.
Like one of the things that I took from MongoDB to Synk was I said, okay, we want to have like great email marketing, great newsletters, things like that. Because when I was at MongoDB, one of the things that, and this is a funny story. When I started at MongoDB, I didn't know anything about anything. So let's be clear, I was very, very young. I didn't know anything about anything. And my boss had told me, okay, you're going to write the MongoDB newsletter. And naturally, the CEO said, okay, I have to review every single newsletter. And the CEO at the time was Dwight Merriman. And so he reviewed every single newsletter. And he basically, through that process, taught me what it meant to deliver good technical content to developers. And so I wish I had taken screenshots and saved them in my wallet, but I used to get emails from people all the time saying, this is my favorite newsletter. I love that you guys keep things technical and I learn something every time. And after that, we built a really good email marketing program, and we would do cool things like make email courses where you would sign up for a course and then get a series of blog posts sent to you about how to build, like one of them was like a serverless app on MongoDB Atlas. And it was huge engagement. Tons of people who used that email course ended up buying Atlas. It was crazy. It was incredible. At Synk, we didn't have the same luck. And I think a lot of that was just a change in mindset where, when I joined Synk, it was COVID. People weren't like opening emails. They didn't like getting emails from vendors. I also think that the type of education that you needed when you were using MongoDB was a little bit different than the type of education you needed when you were using Synk. Because Synk was an application that you set up and you set it up, and then there's some security training that you need to do that's basically from your team. But with MongoDB, there's just like always stuff to learn about how to use the software, and there's, new releases and stuff like that. So I think it was both the products were different and then the times changed. And so that was not as effective. The email marketing just wasn't as effective to both like get people interested in reading content and then also to get people to come back into the app and do things in the app. So from a growth marketing perspective, that used to be a powerful lever, and it kind of died. So now you really have to think about the first 5 minutes, or I tell my companies it's really the first 2 minutes of logging into an app when it's free or trying a project. You need to make sure that initial developer experience is really slick and easy and fun and enjoyable, and that there's no doubts of what people can do and whether they can do it. So one of the interesting things at Synk is the way Synk works is you sign up and then you connect to your GitHub or you connect to another code base. You can even connect to, Docker to scan your containers, right? What we saw was a lot of people would sign up. They would get to the point where they could connect their GitHub and then they wouldn't. And so one of the things I was really curious about as soon as I got there was, why is this happening? Like, why here? And I found out that developers just didn't know if they had the right to do it because they were scared their security team didn't want them to do that. And in some cases, they were at big enterprises and they would try to connect their GitHub and then they couldn't.
It was blocked, yeah.
Right, it's a private repository. So.
Exactly. So it was either blocked or they just didn't know if they could or not. So that was super interesting to me. And as a result, the team ended up building this like different ways of starting with Synk. One of them was like you had a sample code base and things like that. Before we got to the product development part, we included in our intro email, like, if you can't use your own GitHub repository, here's a super insecure app that we built for you. So that was a way to get after that. But that part was super interesting because it wasn't that people weren't motivated. It's just that they weren't sure if they were making the right decision. And I thought that was like super fascinating.
That is, well, it also shows the importance of telemetry on like understanding where the gotcha,
where the journey
100%.
Yeah, where the journey ends. Like, why is it ending there?
Yeah, and building out good product analytics is so hard because in the early days of a company, your developers are just like building whatever.
Well, and that's the thing. Like the longer you put it off, the harder it is to pay off that technical debt.
It is very challenging.
That's another one of those things that you have to have, but it's not core. It's not your core added value.
Yeah.
Right. Just like authorization or authentication or whatever. Though we had Rasmus on a few episodes ago from Elastic, formerly Elastic. They built a company that just does product analytics for SaaS vendors.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's called Bucket.
Bucket.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really neat for that type of stuff because like you don't want to build all that yourself because it's a lot to build that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's complicated to build it right. So just outsource that.
I would say that the only place where you shouldn't do that in a startup, like wait until later, is in security. I feel like that's the one thing that startups maybe put off till later. Yeah. The way we do it at Oso, like the kind of security that we have in place at Oso is just absolutely incredible. We have this engineer, Patrick, who's just loves security. Like he tries things in his own home and tries things on his own.
We're also a security vendor, so it has to be rock solid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think Patrick is great. And he, his perspective is that, I want to do things early and I want to do them right because it becomes so much harder to roll out certain security protocols when your company's bigger. Why not do it now? And we get a nod from the security teams that we talk to. Like one of the examples is I see you have a YubiKey. Like we all use YubiKeys. Yeah. And for a company of our size, it's like, it makes a difference, but it's kind of like a mark to everyone else that we're talking to that like, oh, wow, okay, they're taking things seriously.
You talked about some lessons you learned from Dwight at MongoDB. Now, you were working under the chief marketing officer at Sneak, Jeff Yoshimura.
Loved Josh.
He was the CMO at Elastic before he was the CEO at Sneak, and Sneak's really good friends with him. Did you learn anything from him that was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that before?
I think generally Jeff is an amazing leader. I mean, when he came to Sneak, he brought like half the Elastic marketing team with him and a few other people. Yeah, he's super charismatic, but also he really means what he says. He cares about everyone who works for him. Yeah. And when I would go to him with employee challenges around certain things, like, when a company's growing, it's like some people are like, what's my role here? Like, how do I grow? How do I grow with the company? And Jeff cared so much about that and really wanted to give me the tools to make sure that my team, especially the top players of my team, felt happy and motivated and felt secure and appreciated. And the way that he cared, I think really stood out to me.
What tools did he give you specifically? Like,
well, first of all, if there was ever somebody who was feeling not appreciated, he would talk to them. And then there were a few people on my team who he really liked, and he just had one-on-ones with them. And it wasn't because I asked him to, it was because he wanted to, and he wanted to help those people in their career. And that level of involvement was awesome. He also, I had, like, there were certain things that I knew that he cared about because he wanted to learn more. And so we had a monthly SEO meeting where we would walk him through some of the things we were doing on SEO. SEO was like a massive growth lever for Sneak. So there was a lot of attention paid to it. And he was a huge advocate for investing in that part of the business. So that was awesome. Yeah. And I think he was just super open with his network, with his people. He brought, Ganto from Auth0 to talk to my whole team, which, Ganto has he was the head of marketing at Auth0 for many years. And he's he understands everything about developer marketing. He's an expert, and he has his own agency that does, consulting for the stuff, but he agreed to do it for us for free and talk to my team, and my team loved it. And it was all because Jeff just made the connection and made it happen.
He's like a fractional CMO type person or something, or advisors.
He has an advisory firm for product-led growth, developer relations kind of thing. So yeah, he was really open with his network, connected us with so many people. I think Yosh is also, he's worked at so many companies that have defined a category, I think, as a product. And it's rare to have a leader in marketing who's came up through product marketing, which is what Jeff has done, and also has worked at so many amazing startups like Zuora and Salesforce and Elastic. I mean, that's incredible. He just has such great experience and such great perspective on that stuff. So I appreciated that because most of the heads of marketing I've worked for have come up through demand generation or the revenue engine side of the business. And Jeff taught us a lot about category creation and stuff like that. So
How important do you think the name of a company is? And I ask this because when we started at MongoDB, it wasn't called MongoDB, it was called Tenjin. It wasn't a database company they were building. They were originally building a platform as a service. They built this NoSQL database just to service their customers, something they used behind the scenes. Turns out their customers, that's what they actually wanted. And so they pivoted and became a database company. But they were still called Tenjin, 10GEN. It's like binary second generation or something, right? 10 in binary. And
I never even thought of that.
they did it because if you went to a conference and you looked at a vendor list, it was always first alphabetically.
That's the story I heard. It was like they wanted it to be one.
Yeah, 10. But then people would come by our booth and they'd be like, what is Tenjin? I don't know what to, we're the creators and maintainers of MongoDB. Oh, I know what MongoDB is. So eventually, before the IPO, they changed their company name to MongoDB, right? So it matched what the product people were actually buying, and everyone knew that brand was much stronger than the Tenjin brand. So I'm just curious, like, how important it is.
Yeah. That's such a good question. I think for open source companies, I actually think one of the coolest things they did at MongoDB was be part of that rebranding process, because no one had done it before. Like Ubuntu Canonical, 2 different names. And it was a big step to say we need to change the name of the company to match what consumers are expecting. But after we did that, every other open source company did that. Like Docker had a different name. What was their .cloud? I think it was called.
Something like that.
Yeah, it was called .cloud, and they switched to Docker.
Docker Inc., yeah.
And then DBT Labs, they were Fishtown Analytics, and they moved over. Like every single company.
Elastic was Elasticsearch, and then it changed to Elastic.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Which was kind of the inverse of a little bit of what everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we made it more generic.
But it was. But I thought that was so cool that we did that. So I think how important a company name is. I mean, it is. I think in that sense, like if you're selling a product and your company name is different, but your product is more popular than the company name, I mean, that is a challenge. I think everybody can. Did you ever read like Shoe Dog or the Nike story?
I listened to Shoe Dog on Audible because I lived in Portland forever.
Oh,
so.
right.
Yeah, and I helped build Nike.com, so that's like
so cool.
Yeah,
okay.
in my DNA now.
Yeah. So you know that Nike's company name originally was Blue Ribbon
something like
Sports.
that. Yeah, it was bad. Back when the waffle makers were using the waffles.
And I mean the story, that is like one of the best business stories of all time, like the creation of that, and it's one of the best business memoirs I've ever read. It's amazing. Everyone read Shoe Dog or listen to it. But
Was that Phil Knight's memoir?
Phil Knight's memoir. Yeah, it's really good. And
I watched the movie with Matt Damon about Jordan.
I have not watched it.
I have not watched that. Yeah, but yeah, it's also did you watch that Lakers?
Yeah. John C. Reilly.
Yeah, but when you see, he's so good at that. But when you see Magic Johnson go with, what does he go with, Chuck Taylor instead of Nike? Just like, oh my God. And he's so excited about Nike. He says, what, it's like you could put magic on the shoe? Nike is probably the best brand in the world. Like there's probably one or two others I'm forgetting, but Nike is definitely the best brand in the world. Like you see the swoosh, you go on a subway train, everyone's just wearing Nikes. It just doesn't matter. They can do no wrong.
Well, I think Coca-Cola is the most recognized brand globally.
That's what, Coca-Cola is the most recognized globally, but Nike has one of has some of the strongest brand power.
Right, sure.
And I think a lot of it is like, Nike, the name, like the names of the shoes never overarch the name of the brand. Nike Air Jordans, Nike Cortez, there's all those.
You're a very active angel and seed investor outside of your day job, as well as an advisor to several companies, probably ones that you've invested in and others as well. So we want to talk about that part of your life. And let's start with what's your personal philosophy in seed and angel investing? And what are your expectations of doing that type of investing?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I think everyone who likes thinking about startups should, if they have capital, they should angel invest. I think my understanding of angel investing before I started was that everyone had to be like a Chris Sacca angel investor and like, 100K checks. Yeah. That's what I thought an angel investor was. Yeah. It turns out most angel investors, the angel investors I play in the playground with, were doing anything from 5 to 20K, sometimes more checks. Yeah. And I think that knowing that earlier would have made me want to invest in more companies. And there's a few companies that I was really excited about. And I was like, you're doing something so cool. And I just didn't even know that that was a possibility. And I probably would have done quite well. So
What'd you miss out on?
Oh my God. One of them that I missed out on was Hugging Face.
Oh.
I met their team. They're so sweet. I met their team like in 2017 or 18 or something like that. And they wanted to talk to me about building an open source community. And then they had questions about pricing. I introduced them to Matt AC. He could talk to them about open source pricing because he's been in open source forever. And then I started seeing them everywhere.
Yeah.
And then when I started angel investing, I was like, well, if I had this mindset now, I would have said, this is a great idea. Let's invest in it. And now it's like the platform for, models.
Yeah,
so
right.
Good for them. They did a great job.
I mean, since ChatGPT came out, they've been getting tons of press, obviously. And,
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't get to wet your beak in Hugging Face.
Yeah.
That's
And Raza's another one. They're like AI chatbots as well. And I think they're doing really well now. They're a German company, awesome CEO. So I think everyone who's interested should try to do it. I think my philosophy around it is I don't expect to get any of the money back. All of the money is gone. Yeah. And that frees me up a lot to just treat it as a way to learn about a space that I'm interested in, flex my muscles in different areas, and also just be use my leadership skills to help companies be successful. And it's also like relationship building. Some of these CEOs I would love to maybe, get to know and then maybe work with in some capacity. So that is a good open door. One of the things that I don't think people realize is you can do angel investing through a venture firm by being a venture scout. And so if you know a partner at a firm that you like and you like their philosophy and you like their focus areas, you could ask them, hey, do you have a scout program? I would love to scout for you. And the scout program was something that was developed at Sequoia a couple of years ago. Sequoia said, our founders are great. What if we gave our founders $250,000 each to invest in their friends' companies? And that became a huge top of funnel for Sequoia because their founders were awesome. They knew awesome people building great companies. And so it became a great vehicle for driving more investments to them, to the right partners. And so now a lot of different firms have adopted this. One way to make angel investments, if you don't want to give up the capital, is to do it through a fund. And I think there's a lot of people, especially women, who have really specialized skill sets. Like for me, for example, developer tools and marketing. Like every founder of a developer tools company wants to know the things that I know. And to be fair, I've lived it, so I can tell you what my experience is. There's other people who can do that too. But that gives me a really nice open door into any cap table. Yeah. So of companies that specialize in that. So people have, like, you have specialized experience. If you are excited about this idea, like you should do it.
Is the scout a paid position or is it like an internship or is it just like
you just get
a referral fee?
So you just get to mobilize their capital. That's it.
Do you get a piece, but then do you get a piece of equity yourself?
Different firms have different financial structures around that. So I can't speak for everyone, but I work with Spark Capital, and there is some sort of a return if the company does have some sort of an exit. The one thing about doing scout deals is that, let's say you're at a firm that says, we don't sell until, like, we have a firm policy around not selling until X time frame, then you cannot dictate the terms of your returns. Whereas if you own your portfolio, you can decide at Series B, like, I want out, which actually is probably the stance most people should take. Like, I think even Mark Cuban, he got out of Box, which was one of his like early angel investments. He got out of Box pretty early, and people always say like, oh, Mark would have made so much money. And I'm like, no, that's what angel investors do. You mobilize capital early and you get out early so that you can make more investments. It's not a like, I want to get rich. It's like, if you're doing it as a form of investment, you're taking the funds and moving it into other places to diversify your risk. And also the odds that like all of your companies that you invest in as an angel, if you invest in seed, are going to reach Series B, like, what do you think this is, 2020? This is not happening.
So when you're doing that, like, do you negotiate the terms to say, look, I'm going to give you seed money now, and then I want out at Series B or I want out at Series A?
I don't do that. Your ability to negotiate as an angel investor is probably directly related to the amount of capital and clout that you have. So I'm not like a Chris Sacca or, one of those storied angel investors. So I can't command that kind of.
You can't just say,
I
here's
can't command those kinds of
$5,000,
terms. Yeah.
give me a board seat.
Yeah, no, not at all. So it depends on when you're investing, but sometimes it's, someone, you say, oh, I'd love to be at her cap table. It's pretty informal. In some cases, I am introduced to the founders by a VC firm. So for example, like I know a few partners at firms and I know a few associates at firms. And so they sometimes bring me into deals and they say, oh, this is a company that you'd be interested in. And I meet the founders and then they already have a term sheet. And so I get introduced as part of the process of them filling out the cap table as part of the deal. In those cases, like the terms are already set. And I think different companies have different terms on like when they allow their investors to sell the shares back to the company during different rounds. And so it would be at the discretion of the company that you would do that.
Has anything changed given the changes in the market in your willingness to invest in either direction? Like, are you less willing to invest because the returns are going to be further out? Are you more willing to invest because you're finding better opportunities?
It's interesting because a lot of the data shows that there's certain vintages like now, they call like different funds vintages, but the vintages that happen during times like now where there's like a little bit of economic depression / recession, those are not better times to invest than any other time. So you need to be having hits at bat all the time in order to maximize your returns because you can't really time the market.
It doesn't matter when you invest?
It doesn't matter when you invest.
That's not what I would have expected.
At early stage, it doesn't matter.
Wow.
But there's certain, like I remember, I think First Round Capital showed us some things that were like, there were like some, like, maybe there was like one breakout year or something, but it wasn't really anything more magical. I don't see the market today impacting my interest in investing in early stage startups. Honestly, the hype around AI was the one thing that got me really disinterested in investing in early stage startups because I just got a little annoyed. And I think the hype is encouraging more people to invest in AI companies without thinking about the problem. And sorry, I don't want to like speak for everybody because there's some people who are really good investors, but for someone like me who's doing this on the side and doesn't have the time to think about this stuff, I am less interested in some things like that.
The same problem with the hype in crypto a few years back,
Yeah.
right? It's hard to know what's actually going to be real.
Yeah. So I've taken a break over the past couple of months because I started a new job and got married. So I was like, I don't think I have enough time to talk to people on the side. But probably in like October, I'm going to start investing again. And I am specifically going to look in like databases, data stores, like go back to the things I know really well. The investments I've made, some of the exciting ones I made, one is in a platform for event-driven architectures, and like it's called Ingest. And I see them as taking, it's another like undifferentiated work taken off shoulders. Tons of people want to build event-driven systems and like very complex workflows.
Right, streaming data and everything.
Yeah, but and even in AI, there's like huge use cases there, but they just don't have the capacity to, and they don't have the talent to hire, they don't have the budget to hire the talent, things like that. And so the founders had this experience at both of their companies, and they said, wait, this is a huge problem and we can actually build something to solve this. And it's like a really developer-friendly tool. And I just love that team. So that's a fun one. That was the cool thing about that. That was a VC introduction. I met someone who worked at this firm, GGV. I met him, we talked, and then a couple months later, he reached out and said, hey, I actually have this deal that you really like. And I loved the founders, the customers that they had, like all the back channel was amazing. And I was like, wow, I only got this deal because I knew this one person.
Who you know is everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was a fun one. The other one is, the other one that I really like is ChromaDB. They're a vector search database. They're based in San Francisco. And I'm excited about them just because like love databases. Don't really want to work for a database company again, but I'm excited to still be involved in some way.
And are you advising them too? Or?
At their own discretion. It's not like I'm not reaching out to them saying like, hey, do you want some help? The approach that we're usually given as angel investors and like the guidance we get is like, sit back until you're asked for help. Usually if you're an angel, you get an investor update every month, every quarter, every founder is different. Usually at the end of that investor update, there is a bunch of asks. And so I take those seriously. And every time I get an ask, I want to make sure that I can do my best to give if I can. I also love, like, there's also a kudos section, and you get a kudos if you help out with something.
Okay,
so
yeah.
Get
your name on the board a little.
Yeah, I'm like, trying to be the best student in class all the time. Yeah. So
I try to invest in things that are just wildly different from the enterprise software space that we're in.
Oh,
so
fun.
Like I invested in an automated coffee maker company called Terra Cafe. It's based here in Brooklyn. They're awesome.
Cool.
And just because I want some diversity from my day job, which is like, so much of my money comes from enterprise software. I want to just diversify a little bit, like you going into, health spa, med spas, or like, just something totally different. It's also fun to
that is very smart.
Learn totally different things,
Yeah, all of my money is from tech. I should
Right.
probably put it somewhere else.
Well, right.
I'm just learning how to do all this stuff. Like, you'd be surprised. I've been surprised at how much people are willing to, like, take your offer for help. Mm-hmm. So my daughter's a lash tech. I think I said this on the pod before, and I won't say it again after this one, but like, well, no promises. But anyways, my daughter's a lash tech, and she's on Instagram all the time for advertising, and she saw this automated lash machine that someone's building in California. And I was like, holy cow, that's amazing. And I said, are you worried about this? She's, no, I'm excited about it. Like, I hate doing lashes because it takes an hour and a half, and someone has to lay there for an hour and a half while you're doing lashes for the first time.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it can take anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour and a half to do lashes. And it's very time intensive. And anyway, so this lash machine, on the Instagram post, it said, reach out to us because we're like looking for investors. So I reached out, and the CEO got back to me.
That's so cool.
So then the CEO gets back to me. He says, yeah, the minimum investment's $25,000. I was like, oh, it's not as much as I thought it would be. Like, I was expecting him to say, we need tons of money. So I invested, and their first trial is with Ulta, the beauty store, right? And that's 1,300 stores in America. So if the trial works, they have Ulta wants exclusivity for their machine. I think there's one other company that also got like a deal. Can't remember the name of it though. I don't know the space very well. But anyways, it's kicking off right now. And so then I would go, and at family dinners, I would ask all the women in my life, would you use this machine? And almost all of them said yes. As soon as I say it only takes 30 minutes, they're like,
yeah, it saves you an hour.
Yeah. Because they also hate the hour and a half for lashes, but they want their lashes to look good. Yeah. I am blessed with naturally beautiful lashes, as my wife likes to say. But anyway, so that's an investment I made. And now I have a friend that I used to work with over in London that's trying to build a new skincare line and cosmetics line. And I'm like, well, when you're ready, let me know, because I might be able to introduce you to someone at Ulta. Just now, because I have this connection. I don't know if that's actually going to happen.
It's all about
who you know. It's just kind of crazy. Wow. And then if I do that, I'll get a piece of the pie. Hopefully, I'll invest in her cosmetics company.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that diversification is great. So you don't just invest in developer companies. You invested in Pocus, which is really a tool for sales teams, I think. I mean, we use it at InGrok. That's how we use it. Can you tell people what Pocus does?
Yeah, what is Pocus?
Yes, of course. Pocus is one of my favorites. Shout out to Alexa. Alexa's the CEO. Pocus is a revenue data platform. It allows you to use your data warehouse as a source of truth for all of your revenue data and structure it and send it to your sales team the way you like. So a lot of us are used to, you're in pre-sales. You're used to being, stuck with Salesforce. Salesforce is really challenging to
talk about a terrible UI experience.
I was going to say it's really challenging to use, right. But it's also really challenging to maintain and to build all of the views for everyone. You have to hire specialized engineers to manage everything.
All from the no software company.
Yeah.
It still cracks me up.
So yeah, 100. Yeah, it's so funny. They're like
Salesforce administrator is its own career path. I mean.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it's actually really similar to like the RDBM, the switch from like traditional RDBMS to MongoDB, is that, there was this huge workforce of people who were certified in this database and they were employed, and there was like a ton of things sticking them to this database. But there was a better way there, for not all use cases, but for some use cases, there was a better way of doing things. And Pocus I see as looking at that problem and saying, we need to give sales teams, revenue teams data and give them access to data. But the way that we store data and the way that we capture data and the amount of data we have has transformed, and the way in which we need to be like agile about those views has changed as well. So Pocus has builds a tool that just plugs into your data warehouse, allows you to set the views, makes it really easy for non-developers and non-analysts to set it up. And you can have dynamic views for different aspects of your organization, like for your pre-sales team, for your customer success team, things like that. They started with their main customer base being product-led growth companies. And so then they sort of were like known as this product-led sales tool. But in reality, the framework is relevant to many other types of teams and not just product-led companies, because the approach they're taking is really about flexibility in your data and making sure that you can set the right views for your sales team to interact with the deals that matter. So one of the reasons it was so powerful for product-led sales is because it was able to take your product data and customer data and put it into one view in a really easy way, and then allow your sales teams to follow up on users who were maybe increasing their usage or adding more team members. You can't really do that in Salesforce. It takes a lot of time to set that up. So
like we create these playbooks that kind of automate this process for us.
Yeah. So playbooks is one of their features, and it's basically saying, let's build it's almost equivalent to like a Salesforce view. And it says, let's take this query of this kind of customer profile that we think would buy from us, or we think needs support, or we want to get in touch with. And you build that, and then you set up playbooks for your whole team, and your whole team can just follow up, and they know the approach or the sales play to use to reach out to that whole group of people.
While you were talking, it feels like there's a natural integration here between Bucket, Rasmus's company.
Yeah, because they have the product company, but they don't have the sales data, right?
Yeah, so it's like the combination of these two would be even more powerful,
right.
I think.
Absolutely. Well, Bucket should become a source for POCUS, basically.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
that then integrates with your sales teams and playbooks and everything.
Yeah.
Well, you say you get these investor updates, right? As an investor, can you give us like, what are they working on? You got any?
No, I can't share that.
Okay.
I was on the kudos list this time, so
nice.
Props to me.
Making connections.
But no, the one thing I will say about the POCUS team, I love them. The one thing that I think that they've done really well is they are not inflexible and they move so quickly. Their product team, like their product development's awesome. They're constantly churning out new stuff. And they, I think it's a testament to Isaac and Alexa just probably don't sleep. But they're doing a great job.
You are an advisor to startups, maybe some you've invested in or others that you didn't invest in. When you advise startups in this sort of product-led growth area that you're an expert in, what do you tell them to do differently than you would do at a later stage company like Mongo, Snake, or Oso?
I never tell any of my companies to do anything. I always just share. Usually they ask me questions like, how would you handle this? And I say, well, here's a couple of ways. And I always caveat with, my experience at MongoDB and at Sneak were very different from the stage we're at today. And I also think this, when I joined Sync, it was like 10 million ARR. When I left, it was like 200 million. So really different scales. And then at Mongo, when I joined, it was like, Azure had just come out. Like it was just a really different world. So I always give them that context that like, what I'm going to tell you is, some advice, but you shouldn't just take it as I have to do this. Your question was around like, how does that, how do I...
Should they be doing things differently than the later stage companies?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is that? What are those differences?
I learned something great from somebody named Tito Carreo. He's the founder of Koala, and he had this hilarious phrase of like a learn to burn ratio. And he was like, you need to have a really high learn to burn ratio, which means like you need to be learning more than you're burning. So if you're doing things and you're, you can be making mistakes, but if you're learning from them, that's great. If you're not learning from you, just burning cash, that's a really bad situation to be in. So a lot of the times when I'm talking to them and they're asking me more strategic questions, it's always like thinking of that in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, are you learning more than you're spending to get this insight and to move the needle forward? And I think with later stage companies, you have a bit more cushion around that where you know more about what your audience wants. You have some tried and tested things, and a lot of it's just about scaling them out and making sure that they can continue to deliver growth. Whereas with an earlier stage company, it's like everything is unknown. So you have to figure out how to move quickly.
Yeah, figuring out where to spend your time is really tough. One of the things I started using at my last startup was, will this matter if the company's not here in a year? Like if we do this right now, will it matter? There's a lot of things that you can do that just won't matter in a year. Like if we do this and the company's not here, it won't matter that we've done it. And so like, it's a really good test, I think, for determining whether or not you need to build something now that scales, or you can get by with process light stuff and worry about fixing it later. It's kind of that thing we were talking about earlier. It's like when you decide to build in all the security stuff into your app, right? It's the same thing. When you decide to build in all these processes that are a little bit more advanced that you maybe don't need. And it's very easy in a startup to default to process because you don't know what to do all the time. You don't know how to prioritize everything. And it's like, well, what's right in front of me? Well, this part of the process is broken. So let's go fix that. Fixing that or not is not going to make a difference to whether or not you get that deal that you're trying to get.
Yeah, because finding product market fit is way more important than whether it's the most scalable solution or the most performant solution or any of that. Yeah.
This learn to burn thing is interesting. How do you know when to stop doing something? Because there's learning that there's a little bit of traction here, but maybe it's not enough traction to warrant more investment in that segment for your product. It's like, how do you do that? It's so hard.
I think that's where experience comes in. Yeah. And then there's some people who are just so good at product and so good at certain things that they have a really good spidey sense for this. Yeah. And I also think this is one of those things where like having trust with your team and making them feel comfortable to come to you and say, I don't think we should be doing this anymore. Yeah. People never want to tell their leaders that they're wrong. That's so scary.
Dangerous.
Yeah. But I want that. I want to be told that things are not right. And at Sneak, I loved my team at Sneak. The folks that worked for me, they were awesome. And they would tell me all the time, like, I don't know if this is, and I was like, this is a sign that the team is at a good place, because if you're coming back to me and telling me that, you don't feel comfortable with this stuff, like, let's talk about it. And, more often than not, we decided to I feel like in a lot of cases, we decided that there was like more of an issue in a certain situation that we needed to fix in order for us to progress. But I just loved having that open feedback. And I feel like that's what you need to, in that learn to burn scenario.
So how do you get your team to trust you that much, to tell you the truth?
Did you ever hear the trust equation? There's it's basically trust is like your ability to show someone that you are not self-centered and you care about them. But the trust equation, I think,
the four variables: trustworthiness equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation.
So self-orientation is basically, do you care about other people, or do you only care about yourself? And the credibility is, is someone a leader that you want to follow, or is somebody, and then their reliability, do they do the things that you ask them to do? And I think those are so important to think about when you're trying to help your team go in the same direction and feel confident. So that's one piece. And then the second piece is, I'm a huge proponent of the radical candor approach. That is a very refreshing leadership approach. At Sneak, it wasn't encouraged. The team was very, I think they were mostly British. They were all be nice. But I was definitely, that was one funny thing about working at Sneak, is I was the one often who was like, is there something we're not saying here? There seems like there's something we're avoiding that's a big problem. And I think the big problem is this. And so in my reviews, I always got feedback that you're very open and forward. And I was like, that's not how most people describe me. But in this environment, I have to be, because
it's so important.
But also it's just that's one of those interesting cultural differences that you get when working across different cultures. Is I worked in London for MongoDB when I first started. I got sent over there, and I honestly tell people to this day, I think I would have done better if in the first month and a half, if I had been sent to Taipei or, Bangalore or something, because I would have at least had it in my mind that this is a different culture that you're getting into. Let's be ready for it. Whereas I went to England, I was so silly. I was like, they speak English. The work culture is just so different. And there's this great book by a writer who I can't remember, but it's all about working cross-culturally. And
so the culture map?
The culture map, yeah. But yeah, you start to see those things creep up, and you realize oh, it's not that they don't have anything to say. They just don't want to tell you you're wrong.
I think there should be a metric, and maybe there is, on measuring how fast the truth reaches the top in an organization. And the longer it takes, the more, what's the right way to say it? Like the more dysfunctional the team is, I think. Because of what you said, if there's things that you're not saying because you're afraid to say them, this is where I think people get psychological safety wrong. It's not about making a safe environment for people to tell you their worst fears and desires. It's about trusting each other enough to tell you the truth when something's wrong and not being afraid of repercussions.
So true.
Why did you wait until the last minute of the podcast to drop that?
It dropped so much
It just
knowledge.
popped up. It just popped up. I was like, why don't we have a metric to measure this? Like, because you get to the point, I've been in this
Time to
situation.
CEO truth.
It's like,
All right, we got to stop. We got to stop.
all right. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, we should explore that on another episode. Francesca, thank you. We've talked for 2 hours. I feel like we could talk 2 more.
I know.
Like, it's been so
I don't know
great.
how much we're going to cut.
Your knowledge is great. Your background is incredible. You obviously have a huge track record of success. Thank you for coming and sharing your stories today. Everybody, if you like this episode, if you got value out of this episode, which I know you did, if you made it to this mark, please share our LinkedIn post. Please tell one person about this episode and help us get the word out so we can get even more great guests like Francesca. Thanks for being here today.
And I promised myself I was never going to say click the like button on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube, so I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, smash the like button. Thanks, Francesca.
It was great to have you on the show.
Thank you.